Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy.
Yo, dear listeners, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have Dr. Joe Klemczewski with me to talk about the science of fat loss adherence and compliance. We're going to delve into the psychology of what makes a diet easier or harder to adhere to, and what makes the difference between a person who's successful at losing fat and maintaining it versus someone who is not. But to start with, Joe, thank you very much for joining me today.
You are welcome. I appreciate it very much.
My first question to all of my guests is always, who are you? What do you do? And why are you so awesome at it?
Very nice of you. Appreciate that. My name is Joe Klemczewski. I went to school to become an orthopedic physical therapist many years ago in the late 80s, actually. And I was also very interested in bodybuilding, having transitioned from a performance sport background. I played baseball and some other sports in high school. When I first joined the military and then went to college full time, I just transitioned seamlessly into wanting to stay in good condition. I was already interested in bodybuilding as a sport already, so it was fun to focus on that full time. So when I graduated and started working with orthopedic patients, my bodybuilding career kept escalating nicely. So I became a WNBF pro bodybuilder, and having already just left the academic system, I thought it would be fun to pursue nutrition. That was always a hobby of mine, a very strong interest, because my body type did not allow me necessarily to get very lean as easily. And having already competed in a few bodybuilding contests, I just found the old school methods very unreliable. And I was one of those people who would be disappointed every contest day where I would wake up and just would not look my best. So I ended up pursuing a PhD in nutrition, just for fun, just to become a better bodybuilder. But then the entire world of personal training became a thing. At that point, even personal training was not really an industry. So that captured my attention, and I thought, how fun would it be to combine my interest in nutrition and aggressive, goal-oriented weight training, bodybuilding, especially for me, with physical therapy, with just health and fitness. So I created a facility where we could do that, and formally left physical therapy as an occupation to become more of an entrepreneur. And along the way, as I progressed through my bodybuilding career in now the WNBF, I started writing for some of their top magazines. They had a publishing company in New York City with 6 or 7 magazines. I became their science editor, and this was pre-social media, so that garnered a lot of attention. People who were interested in the sport would often look at natural bodybuilding and fitness, or different publications like that. I've written some articles for Muscle Media, for Muscle and Fitness, Muscular Development, Ironman. I was a columnist for a while. So along the way through those publications, I was invited to fitness camps, science conferences. I ended up doing a second doctorate in health education to help me a little bit more with publishing books and so forth. And I like to say I accidentally created the field of personal nutrition coaching, because in the US, the American Dietetics Association was very aggressive legislatively in making sure nobody could do any form of nutrition. And that was complied with for the most part. Nobody really dared to go into that area. I worked with an intellectual property attorney to make sure we were doing things the right way, created a franchising company so I could train coaches. I could license them to do this legally. And so still pre-social media with my work in some of the magazines, and now entrepreneurially creating this pathway forward for nutrition coaches that goes back almost 25 years ago. That created the momentum for people to do that as an occupation. And as you know, that just took off like wildfire to the point where nobody even is concerned with legal ramifications. In the States, there are still some restrictions and so forth, but they've at least been a little bit more defined. Where as long as we're not doing medical nutrition therapy or other protected allied health services, but just very tangent to personal training, sticking to competent nutrition practices. Now everybody can do that. So flash forward now 30 some years, and we as a company still license, certify, and mentor coaches. So that kind of catches us up to today.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm actually really excited to talk to you because I've not been in the industry all that long. It's been about 5 years now that I've been working as an online coach and personal trainer, and all of the fitness professionals that I consider mentors of mine have learned from you. And so I've discovered them first, then I discovered you, and I've been following you for so many years. And I'm really interested in getting into this topic with you because my understanding is that you're even studying social psychology at a university level. Is that correct?
Yes, just kind of for fun, Nikias, I ended up when I thought, hey, retirement's in the future. What am I going to do then? And so I did a master's degree in my early 40s in writing and creative and professional writing, and I ended up steering my primary genre in writing into nonfiction, specifically not just psychology. For me, it started out as personality psychology, which was a branch of social psychology. So when I finished that, I thought, wow, now I have this master's degree in writing, and it got me very interested in the social sciences. So then I did another master's in social psychology. And as my history, you'll see, tends to do, that led me, excuse me, to one more interest, which is if I want to write as a career, I want that to be a through line all the way, through retirement. And of course, I'm a health scientist, so I love fitness and nutrition, but that's really myopically me. That's my body, that's my relationship with my own psychology and mindset. But I'm also very interested in us as a species, as a society, as a civilization, culture. So social psychology led me to just the general social sciences. And so I did yet another master's degree. This one was a little bit unplanned, but it was during the pandemic. So, we all had a little bit of time. And so I thought, well, I'll do this. It'll be fun to kind of hammer this out and learn some new things. So that brought in some political science, history, anthropology, things like that. So now I feel like at least with health science and my physical medicine background with nutrition and training, being a competitive bodybuilder, health and movement and just personal longevity is obviously still a foundation for me. But now I get to help people on a broader level. Let's make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Are you happy with your life, or what are your outlooks? So it really, I'm definitely not a clinical psychologist, nor would I ever consider doing personal therapy. I'm really more interested in culture and society.
That's really fascinating. And I do want to delve into those deeper nuances of fat loss and why people succeed and fail. And I think a good place to start, I was thinking about it before while writing my outline. And there's a very common soundbite in the fitness industry that goes 95% of diets fail. And supposedly this has been extrapolated from actual evidence. So I'm wondering if you could expand on the soundbite and give it the nuance it deserves. What does it mean that 95% of diets fail in research, and if that's even really true?
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting you asked that because I too, in just the last few months, wanted to see if there was updated research on that because that is very much a cliche in the industry. And I know when we used to employ a health psychologist, she had done some study and showed it was a little bit more nuanced than that, in that about 80% of people was the realistic number would have some form of recidivism and regain weight. But it gets worse the longer you go from that weight loss experience. So at one point, one study showed that anybody who starts losing weight, if we put them in a category and study them longitudinally, the average, even though some people would succeed, let's say 5% or 20%, the average person weighed 107% of their original weight, meaning as a collective group, they were in worse shape than when they had even started. So I wanted to look that up, and the best information I could find, Kevin Hall is a director level researcher at the National Institutes of Health, and in his analysis just a couple years ago, that 80% is a good line for about the 2-year mark. So anybody who loses weight today, 1 year later, half of them have gained all of that weight back, so 50%. And 2 years later, 80% of those people have gained all of their weight back. So again, you can see, 50% for 1 year, 80% for 2 years. At 5 years, the average is 107% of total weight regained collectively as a group. We certainly do approach that 100% line. It's still a very dire statistic to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And let's delve into the factors that contribute to that statistics. What are the main factors that cause people to fail? Because it could be practical as well as psychological.
Mhm. A very good way to state that, because this does happen on different levels at the same time. It would be silly to say that there is one factor or that we could rank them, because we have different personality strengths and weaknesses, and our lives could be different when we're 20 years old versus 40 years old. And so we have to look at everybody's uniqueness and their station in life. But in terms of the pure psychology, the strengths and weaknesses of people who are more successful at weight loss maintenance than others, uh, several studies show that the most successful people are the most conscientious. So people who are a little bit toward the OCD line, they're possibly rigid thinkers in terms of everything needs to be in order. I'm very conscientious, everything's black and white. So again, these are all strengths and weaknesses. That's not necessarily the way you want to manage your entire life, but those are the people who tend to be able to create the discipline to stick with something long enough that perhaps some of those habits become more intrinsic. But I want to focus on that word intrinsic for a second, because one of my favorite studies of all time was Dr. Josh Green from Harvard. He is a psychologist in their moral psychology department. And in a little bit of an unrelated field, but even he related it back to health and weight loss. They wanted to look at people's alignment to their stated goals, their stated values and ethics. So imagine you say, I'm a very good person. I'm honest. I'm just a good person. And then you turn around and steal from your employer or something like that. So you actually behave outside of your goals. And you could relate that to a dieter. I want to be a healthy person. I want to lose weight. I'm going to do all of these things. And then as soon as you pass a cookie, you can't help but eat it. And so now you acted misaligned with your stated goals. And all of the researchers really thought they had the answer. They thought, well, clearly what we want to teach is what I just mentioned, Nikias, that conscientiousness, the ability to stop and ponder and think and really embrace those values would be the marker. And so they were using a functional MRI method to do this exam. They were looking at the person's brain, all the subjects' brains in real time, to see what parts of their brain were active in contemplating those decisions, And then what parallels could they draw between the ones who were successful and stayed in line with their stated goals and those who weren't? And what they thought was going to confirm what Viktor Frankl, the famous author and psychoanalyst who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, Holocaust survivor, he created the field of therapy, the discipline logotherapy, and of course that talked about if somebody has a great reason, if they have this true attachment to something, then they would be able to live a happy life. They would be much more in tune with contentment because they had something really deep to live for. And he talked about these kind of uh, issues in terms of the gap. It's a famous phrase that he created, which is, a stimulus occurs, we're prompted to make a decision, and the longer we stop and think, we almost become our own omnipotent narrator. We step out of our own experience and we think about this, and here's the stimulus. Create a nice gap to think through it. Don't be impulsive. It's just a long-winded way of saying don't be impulsive, and then react with better knowledge. So these researchers at the Harvard moral psychology department thought, well, that's what's going to happen. We're going to see these people's neocortices light up, and they're going to do all this contemplative, thought process, and they're going to be the ones who do it. They're the ones who are going to succeed and act in accordance with their stated values. They found the exact opposite. People who made the right decision most of the time in alignment with their goals. So a dieter who's making the right decision, staying in compliance and adhering to their diet, their neocortex didn't light up at all. It was their limbic system, which is the pure emotional impulsivity, exactly the opposite. And with some more study and perhaps some interviews, they were able to deduce that these people had such strength in their values. They were so almost self-righteous. Well, I am the person who would never do that. I am going to be disciplined. I'm a healthy person. I will not deviate from my goals. It was just a reflex. It truly was an impulse, but it was tied to an incredibly emotional reaction. And that's a stunning bit of new research because, as I said, it really is the opposite of what we thought. Because the more we think about something, we can rationalize it and justify it and think, well, okay, so maybe I didn't want this food, but I've had a really good workout today, so I'll do it anyway. Or I can diet a little bit harder tomorrow, so I'm going to do it anyway. We can always rationalize ourselves into being unaligned with our goals, but if we're so intrinsically strong in those values, then those are the people who usually just won't break.
That is stunning. At the same time, it also sounds like conscientiousness and this strong sense of intrinsic motivation are outside of our control, in that it sounds like from what you're saying, people already have these this trait of conscientiousness and this strong, almost self-righteous attitude towards their own values. Now, if I'm somebody who comes to you, Joe, and I've been struggling with my weight for a long time, and you are aware of this research, how would you advise me to cultivate conscientiousness and a different attitude towards my values?
So again, an incredibly insightful comment, and I'm going to take your hand off and even go one step prior, in that absolutely genetics play a lot in this, and that is because even the way the sophistication and the evolution and therefore the DNA of our brain, from the neocortex in general to the dorsolateral, um, you know, neocortex, the nucleus accumbens, different parts in the brain that allow us to control impulse, does have an incredibly strong genetic component. Some people, this goes back to the famous Stanford marshmallow study, some people just seem to be born with more willpower as a personality trait. But within those confines, we know neuroplasticity is possible, and we can remap and rewire our brain to some degree that allow us to strengthen and perhaps go to the edge of what we are genetically possible, to do. And then you also have to consider that that kind of almost determinism. Dr. Robert Sapolsky famously just wrote and released this book in the last year, Determined, and he believes that there is no free will. That not only does our DNA completely predict who we will become, but going back layer after layer after layer after layer to not only just your environment as a child, but in utero and your DNA ancestry beyond that, that you just can't ever choose a different body. I can't choose a different background. I can't choose a different upbringing. I can't choose different DNA. So we all have very, very tight parameters that create those boundaries for us. But where I disagree with him slightly is that within those boundaries, we still have, through operant conditioning and decision making and creating, habit formation change, we can change. It's just within those parameters that, seem to be framed out for us genetically. So if somebody came to me and said, well, I seem to have a pretty tough time with this, like every part of my life, I seem to struggle with discipline. Instead of being conscientious, I'm incredibly impulsive over here. And of all the 24 strengths and character traits that we study in personality psychology, their strengths may be in totally different areas, which is great. That makes them better at some things, maybe just not this. So then we have to say, okay, through more of a behavioral, therapy method, how do we get you to use those same strengths you have in this area? May not come as naturally to you, may not be the thing you want to do, but if you say this is a strong value, we just have to pay more attention to it than other things. So it's never that you can't succeed. It's just going to be more difficult for some people.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because I think a disempowering narrative in the industry is also that obesity is a result of being too lazy to exercise enough and not conscientious enough to eat the right thing. So, a common piece of advice is, hey, if you want to lose weight, you need to exercise more and eat less. And if the person who lives with obesity responds with, no shit, Sherlock, to put it bluntly. And whereas clearly there are, first of all, genetic factors that make fat loss harder for some people over others. And could you explain other factors that are not under our control that make um, the pursuit of fat loss legitimately harder on some people versus others?
Absolutely, and there are many. The most modern research we have genetically, and remember, the human genome wasn't even fully mapped until about 30 years ago, and so a lot of this discovery is ongoing. Uh, Researchers currently say that we have about 250 different genes and gene expressions that tie into obesity, and collectively, that makes about 70% of obesity purely genetic. And the way I like to explain it, going back to culture, is sure, 40, 50, 60 years ago, we can look at when the obesity rate was less than 5%. Now it's over 40. Certainly, our genetics didn't change in one generation as a species, so you have to look at the environment, the culture, the food availability, the pressures, the economic situations we find ourselves in, the food industry, and what's even available in the foods we consume, the highly palatable processed foods, and say, okay, back then with that kind of social structure, we as a species, which have evolved for hundreds of thousands of years in scarcity, people dying of starvation, trying to find enough food. Now, for the last 100 to 150 years, we find ourselves in this period of overabundance. Now, more people are dying from obesity than they are starvation, but our genetics cannot catch up that quickly. And so, even how many fat cells we have can be very genetic. You can have a range between 15 billion adipose cells, and somebody else has 150 billion. So now just the amount of receptor sites that create, a lipogenic environment, so you're storing body fat more easily. Hormones like leptin are genetic. The way you even perceive hunger, the hypothalamus and its loop with the gastric system, that's incredibly diverse genetically. So you start carving into all of those 250 or so genes and gene expressions, and there's just nothing untouched in terms of your propensity to have a certain phenotype. And I know it gets poo-pooed a little bit now to divide things up into some classic categories like endomorph, ectomorph, mesomorph. But even if you look at that as a 100% continuum, and you could be anywhere on that spectrum, it's still genetically determined to at least 70%. So again, you just have to know that that's where you are, and therefore take better care where it just doesn't come naturally to you.
I believe that's important to cover because it seems like it's disempowering to know that for you it might be harder for other people. But actually, to me, it's the opposite because once you know, you can stop blaming yourself for being too lazy, as people might say in quotation marks, and you can actually focus on what truly matters for you to that can truly help you achieve your goals, which is certainly not beating yourself up all the time. And we've established that conscientiousness, developing, cultivating conscientiousness and intrinsic motivation is really important. And circling back to intrinsic motivation, I don't know about your experience, Joe, but a lot of clients, when they come to me, they often aren't even in touch with what their values actually are. And it's something that I heard you say on a podcast, which I also find is true, is that one of the primary reasons why people want to work with me to begin with is physique. And only at a later stage, they start developing an understanding of their values. So, my question would be when you're sitting down with somebody for the first time and they tell you that their main goal is physique related, and you already know that that might not be enough for them to be successful, how do you go about helping them understand what their values are? And maybe even to start even earlier than that, we could cover the definition of values.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's important for a coach to understand a client can only learn a certain amount of information at a time. And like you said, their self awareness for some of these things may be incredibly low. So when they come to you, you start just dumping information on top of information. We know, for example, that in you and I having this conversation, if an hour from now somebody tested us both on our recall, we would average about 25%. You and I will remember about 25% of this conversation in an hour. So imagine day after day after day, a very motivated client just learning more about nutrition and fitness and health, and they're just inundated with all of this information. You can't have the most depth with all of these topics you can. So as a coach, you have to have a very sequential chronological plan. Here's what we're going to work on right now. This week, here's what we're going to do. And we as coaches often want to pour all of the good stuff out. Like, oh, let's talk about this study and this, and values and intrinsic motivation. And they just mechanistically need to know, what am I going to eat tomorrow? And so and then sometimes they get resistance from coaches because coaches will very self-righteously say, well, I don't want to just give you a meal plan. That would be lazy and unhelpful for you in the long term. So I've got this great process for you to go through in the system. And in fact, we want to give the clients as much support and foundational structure in the beginning, and expect that very soon there's going to be opportunity for some of these bigger conversations. So um, you and I can't again know every strength and weakness and challenge that a client's going to have. So to be very in tune with communication and conversation and asking them good leading subjective questions, not always based on how did you do this week, how much weight did you lose, this number, that percent, but really getting into how they're absorbing this information and what their true experience is. Then we can bring that up. If a client, for example, struggles in the first couple weeks. Joe, I was doing so great, and then, gosh darn it, my daughter had a birthday party. I was planning on only having one little bite of cake, and I had three pieces of cake. I'm horrible. I'm a failure. I can't do this. And that's what I could have that conversation. Well, some people do struggle more with others because of how our brains are wired and these values and traits. And, this may be a difficulty for you. So let's start thinking about how to be more aware of those situations, maybe plan ahead. Maybe I'll even send them a personality inventory link, from the Big Five or the VIA, 24 character strengths survey. There are all kinds of tools out there just to start that conversation. And if I get them to understand something as simple as this, here's a little mantra that I like to use. If you are motivated just by your physique, just how I look, that's only going to take you so far. And as soon as you look that way, then your motivation is going to wane. But what is it about that person? Another cliche, if you want what somebody else has, do what they do. So if you want to look like that person you envision in the future, you want to look lean and healthy, you want to be lean and healthy functionally, what do the most lean and healthy people do? How do you observe them eat? How do you observe them take care of their health? They're not looking for shortcuts. They're not looking for excuses and justifications on when they can binge eat and then over diet or exercise. They are intrinsically motivated. And so you see that dedication and consistency as a through line. We've got to get you aligned as closely as we can with that. You may not be perfect, especially at the beginning, but that has to be our plumb line. That's the gold standard because that's what you're telling me that you want. So that's a whole conversation I just role played with you, Nikias, on just teaching what intrinsic motivation is. At the beginning, it's just protein, carbs, and fats, and a meal plan.
I really like that explanation because it really encapsulates the importance of accepting every phase that you are in as a temporary phase. Because I find that there's the often the instinct to think of what you're doing right now as what you'll be doing forever. So if it's not perfect right now, there's almost the fear that it will never be perfect. So you could get better results. So even saying acknowledging that right now your main motivator is your physique, your main motivation is your physique. If you know that, then you might start thinking, oh, but that's not the best motivation. So now you're holding yourself back because you're criticizing your motivation. Whereas what I find is more helpful is to accept the place where you're at and to think of it as this is a phase and it's going to help me transition into the next phase. And that's in a nutshell what you've been explaining, if I didn't get it wrong.
Yeah, that's very well said. And you made me think of another researcher who specializes in ADD and ADHD. I believe his name is Dr. Russell Barker or something close, University of Massachusetts. And he explains that the people who have the greatest internal motivation, those skills, whether they're built or innate, they are masters at using external motivation as tools to build and maintain intrinsic motivation. So the example, like you just said, of I want my physique to look better. I just, that's what I want to do. So perhaps you're going to integrate some training and exercise, of course, that would be helpful. But then one of the number one factors or traits of people who are successful weight loss maintainers is that they, again, conscientiously track their weight. They monitor their weight. I personally get on a scale every single morning. I mean, whether I have a goal or not, I just get on that scale. And it's not that I'm obsessive or have any kind of an eating or psychological disorder with OCD. I've just been concerned and interested in and enjoy better health my entire life since I was a child. So, knowing that the National Weight Control Registry and other longitudinal studies all conclude that the single greatest common denominator of successful weight loss maintainers is that they track their weight or body comp measurements of some sort, and they track their food, at least they learn to in some fashion. Those are the people who are the best long term weight loss maintainers. So I go back to that's an extrinsic skill or an extrinsic behavior that I use because I'm so intrinsically motivated. If I wasn't intrinsically motivated to be healthy, if it wasn't my value to be highly functional, I wouldn't care and I wouldn't get on that scale every day. So that's just one example of using external motivation to help build and maintain internal motivation.
That's fascinating. And since you brought up the National Weight Control Registry and weight loss maintainers, then my next question is, you've already mentioned weighing yourself, monitoring your weight, and also tracking what you eat are two key behaviors that are common to weight loss maintainers. What other behaviors do they engage in which are external motivators to help them stay on the right track?
Mhm. A big one that kind of rounds out the top two or three is that they all do intentional exercise. And I remember going back to my first year owning a fitness facility. It was just fascinating to me to see so many different types of people coming into a gym to work out. Some people were gung ho and they really wanted to build muscle and strength. Others were maybe later in life just trying to maintain good health. Some were actively trying to pursue weight loss. But it was really funny to me that there was a certain population who hated being there. They didn't like it. They would rather be somewhere else, sitting at home reading a book or sitting in a bar with a friend, but they came in every day to work out just because they knew they had to, because they valued their health, they valued the way they looked, perhaps they valued longevity. And so even though they didn't like that it took them this hour a day as a just biological truth to be a healthier person, they still did it. Just like any other discipline, we do things that are hard sometimes because we want the result of what doing that hard thing gets us. And so that's one of my life lessons in the fact that I just learned to really respect those people. If you love to do it, even if you're achieving something amazing, it's not that much of a sacrifice because you love doing it. But if you're really willing to go through the grind to get there, so that's exercise. That's one of them. Monitoring your weight, learning the language of nutrition, so you have some objective metric of your food is important. Exercise is important, and then some of the other variables and common denominators for people who are successful maintainers get a little bit, kind of funny. Things that you wouldn't expect because they're almost benign. One that maybe isn't is that most of them eat breakfast every morning. We're in this kind of, I think, on the back end of the intermittent fasting craze. And everybody, what has now become the classic model is to fast for 16 hours a day and then eat all your food in 8 hours. And most people find it easier just to wake up and skip breakfast and not eat until midday. That's the worst thing to do for you long term, and just metabolic turnover in energy balance. And so study after study after study after study shows that when you consume protein in your first meal, when you consume a solid whole food breakfast early in the day, it doesn't have to be right when you wake up, but all of those factors that go into somebody eating early in their day, in some randomized controlled studies and so forth, those people burn more calories per day than if they missed that meal. Against other groups, they burn more calories. Their metabolisms are higher, collectively. They maintain more lean body mass. Hormones are more favorable because testosterone tends to be elevated in the morning. So again, in that top five is eat breakfast. But then some things just kind of fade away very quickly after that. They're almost preference based.
That's really intriguing. And before I move on to my next question, I have a comment about the intentional exercise behavior that you've discussed. I find it really interesting how it seems to really speak to the importance of intrinsic motivation, because if we look at studies, comparing diet alone, exercise alone, and diet plus exercise, that exercise alone doesn't seem to be very effective for fat loss. But when it comes to weight loss maintenance, it seems to be a key component. The people who maintain an active lifestyle are much more likely to maintain the weight loss. And so I think it speaks to intrinsic motivation, because it's not that they're burning the most important contributor to their weight loss maintenance isn't the fact that they're burning calories. It's the fact that that behavior reminds them that they have they pursue that behavior because they believe they have the identity of somebody who is healthy. And to them, a person who is healthy exercises regularly.
I think that's a really important differentiation. You're exactly right. And ironically, I just did a little research review this morning. We do a couple of these a week in small formats, and I looked at an internal medicine study that compared people who were calorie restricting for intentional weight loss, people who were calorie restricting plus exercise for weight loss. And this was a randomized controlled trial, so people were in one of four groups. They were given all of the instructions, parameters. One group who exercised only with no calorie restriction, so they could eat ad libitum, and then the control group that did nothing. And the two groups, one that calorie restricted intentionally but didn't exercise, and the one who calorie restricted plus exercise, they were the only ones who lost weight in 12 weeks, almost 7.5 kilos, 15, 16 pounds. So almost undifferentiated, except that the people who added the exercise, of that 15 or so, I'm sorry, 7.5 kilos, um, they lost up to 3 more kilos in body fat and added up to 3 kilos of lean body mass. So there is a physiological basis for what you're describing. I do agree that it's still the habit, the intrinsic motivation, the act of exercising every day helps motivate you to even make better decisions with your food. If I've worked out this morning, I'm going to, top of mind, consider eating better. That's just part of that habit formation and building intrinsic security, as you said. Uh, but there still is the real value of what the exercise is doing. As a matter of fact, the exercise only group that did not calorie restrict and didn't lose a single pound of weight or a single kilo, they actually also had that recomposition effect where they lost body fat and gained muscle, and their glucose disposal rates, their insulin sensitivity testing, all those metabolic markers were also significantly improved. So just by exercising, they became very much healthier even in just 3 months, even though there wasn't any weight loss. So the common denominators to connect there are, for long term actual weight loss and maintenance, of course, you have to understand the food you're eating, you have to restrict energy when it's appropriate. But the through line is definitely the exercise again that we're describing.
Thank you for explaining that. Of course, I did not mean to imply that exercise doesn't have physiological effects. They would
Right.
be absolutely ridiculous. But that explanation that you gave was really thought-provoking. So we have been talking about the importance of conscientiousness, the importance of intrinsic values. Now, a population that expresses this to what you could call an extreme degree is bodybuilders. Successful bodybuilders, they take this to the extreme because they are the people who lose the most amount of body fat in order to step on stage. And so I think, especially now that bodybuilding is becoming more and more popular in the fitness community, it would be, and given that you coach bodybuilders and you were a bodybuilder yourself, I think it's important for people who aren't bodybuilders, but who are exposed to the world of bodybuilding via social media nowadays, understand what we can learn from bodybuilders, but also what not to do that they do, because that's what might be problematic if your goal isn't to step on a bodybuilding stage.
That is an incredible full circle question for this reason. If you take conscientiousness to an overplayed degree, you can end up failing just as much as people who don't have that personality trait. So in one particular study, they showed it this way. If you are overly conscientious, meaning probably leaning into obsessive compulsive disorders, then it is all about the performance. It's all about the win. It's me getting to a certain level. And then when I'm no longer interested in that, I'll be obsessive about something else and I'll lose that. So I see a lot of retired bodybuilders and powerlifters and even performance athletes who 20 years later are obese and dying of heart disease like anybody else. They did nothing for their health or longevity or long-term functionality. They were just conscientious about achieving that very myopic goal. So it's conscientiousness combined with open-mindedness that is the best combination for building that long-term outlook. So open-mindedness means, as you said earlier, uh, I'm willing to evolve. I realize this phase isn't going to be forever. When I was in my teens, I worked out and I changed my nutrition. I began lifting weights when I was 11 years old to be a better baseball player. Then I transitioned to becoming a better bodybuilder. Then I transitioned to really working on functionality and mobility in my 30s as I retired from the sport. Then in my 40s and 50s now I have very different goals, but I still train. I train differently. I train just as hard as ever because I'm intrinsically motivated, but I've been open-minded to let my life evolve and take me in places where I wasn't closed off to. I wasn't just one-dimensional. So it's very important because in an interesting way, my last point to this uh, is when I was just kind of getting started in my coaching career, I found, even though I participated in bodybuilding, it was a very weird sub niche culture to the general population. And I just almost wanted to separate those clients. You're a competitive sport, physique sport person, you're in the general population. With social media now, it's just all smashed together. So very much so, my clients who would never even dream of stepping on a stage or doing something and they don't want to, they still see that information and they still see those people, and they become sources of information and sometimes sources of inspiration. So we can learn, what it takes to be that highly motivated and disciplined. The Olympics just, ended a couple weeks ago, and I love that. I love the performance sports. And so I'm instantly thinking, man, I'm going to go to the track. I'm going to get out the old stopwatch and I'm going to work on my mile time again. I'm not going to be an Olympic runner, but I can still draw inspiration and education from those people and use it to motivate me to do something even more fun than I may be doing right now.
Excellent. And I'm glad that, as you said, we brought it full circle to end this podcast. And before I wrap up, I wanted to ask you if there's anything at all that you wish we had said that we hadn't, or anything that you want to leave the audience with.
It would be hard to even contemplate, Nikias. You did such a great job of just facilitating the conversation, obviously, with some thought and the outline. So I'm excited to have participated. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. If, in case you're wondering if flattery will get you anywhere, yeah, yes, it will get you absolutely everywhere with me. Compliment me, and I will be your best friend forever, Joe.
That's
But no,
funny.
on a serious note, this was really, really thought provoking, and it's the kind of conversation that we don't have often enough in the fitness industry. You are considered the godfather of flexible dieting. My understanding is that you introduced counting macros to the bodybuilding industry, but fat loss success and maintenance goes beyond calories and macros, and I think we have plenty of evidence in research and in the real world to tell us that right now. So I think these are conversations that actually matter and move people forward.
I completely agree, Nikias. And again, very, very mature of you to realize that, having been in the industry for less than a decade. Because when I brought macronutrient tracking as a methodology to the world 30 years ago, it was not an intentional, thought through process. I did not think, gosh, you know what the world is missing? Third grade math. I'm going to teach the world how to use a calculator. It was simply that we weren't doing that. We were only following meal plans, which were very rigid, and that was creating a lot. That was my main focus. It was just creating so much failure because you either followed this diet or you were off the diet. So by teaching people that, wait a second, we can give you a lot of flexibility, hence flexible dieting, by just using this like a financial budget. And we still want to be cognizant of qualitative issues. There is food quality to be considered. There's all the psychological components we've discussed today, but you still can't ignore the quantity. That physiological uh, just end line. There is a certain amount of calories and energy balance we need to consider, and then you get into the macronutrients. Well, why do I need a certain amount of protein and carbs and fat, and how much latitude do I have, and why? But now, instead of that being this new kid on the block, this new concept for people to learn, I think most everybody understands that's baseline. That's almost everybody I encounter now, new clients, they know what tracking macros is. They understand there is that metric to consider, and now they're ready for all these next things that we're discussing today. So it is very much something that we have to cycle back to and make sure people understand the foundations. But then we do definitely, as you said, have to go well beyond that.
Absolutely. Macro counting, what you in third grade math, as you dismissed it jokingly, is macro counting is the first stage that enables evolution. Just like we were saying, there are different stages to the process. The first stage is understanding what you aptly called the language of nutrition, which, when it comes to fat loss, very much relies on an understanding of energy balance, which has to do with math. And it's crazy to think that you facilitated that evolution at the time by introducing step number one, understand the numbers. And now we're having this conversation today that built upon those foundations.
Yeah, absolutely. And 10 or 20 years from now, who knows where we'll be? But with people like you, it's certainly encouraging conversations like this that need to be had.
Thank you. And now to wrap up, please let everybody who's listening know where they can connect and work with you if they wish. So I can add all of the links in the show notes.
Okay. My social media, primarily Instagram and Facebook, is at Joe Klemczewski. So just my name. And then on YouTube, where we have a lot of our own podcasts, thousands and thousands of videos and research reviews, it would be The Diet Doc.
And dear listeners, in case Joe hasn't done an excellent job of basically covering why you should follow everything that he does, I can guarantee I binge listen to his podcast and it's fantastic. So click on that goddamn link in the show notes, please. And but getting serious again for a moment, I just want to thank you, dear listeners, as always, for giving me and Joe some of your time today. And Joe, thank you again for participating in the conversation. And until the next episode.
Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.